In this video, we are going to look at finding the zeros of polynomial, but this time we're going to deal with being given imaginary zeros, and we're going to have to find the conjugate and go from there. FOIL it out, and here we're going to have to use long division. So let's take a look at our first example. We're given g of x equals x cubed minus 3x squared plus 4x minus 12. And we're told we have an imaginary zero of 2y. And so what we've learned before is that if we have one imaginary zero, we have another. Is that imaginary zeros always come in pairs. So I need to find the conjugate. And so the conjugate of 2y is negative 2y. What I'm going to do is set up my factors from here. So I have x minus my 2y and x minus a negative 2i, so x plus 2i. So I set up the factors created from these zeros, and I'm going to FOIL, which you know me, that means distribute. X times x is x squared. X times 2i is 2ix. Negative 2i and x is negative 2ix. Negative 2i and positive 2i is negative 4i squared. Remember, if you multiply an imaginary number by its conjugate, the imaginaries will cancel. 2ix and negative 2ix disappear. And we know I squared is negative 1. So you have negative 4 times negative 1, which is a positive 4. And so I'm left with x squared plus 4. That is just the expression created from looking at my zeros, multiplying them together. What I have to do next is I have to use long division to take this polynomial and divide it by what we found. So I'm going to be setting up, let's take this and move it to the side. I'm going to be setting up my long division now. For long division, you take a look, your exponents here are all accounted for, 3, 2, and 1. So I'm going to set that up, x cubed minus 3x squared plus 4x minus 12. And we're going to do long division with x squared plus 4. If I look here, though, I'm missing my x term. So I'm doing long division with x squared plus 0x plus 4. So remember, when you're doing long division, you take a look, how many terms am I dividing by? 3 terms. So I go over 3 terms. And my first term is going to be written over this 4x. And we try and eliminate the largest amount possible. You know, what do you multiply x squared by to get x? And that would be an x. And so now I distribute x to x squared, x to 0x, and x to 4. And that's going to give me x cubed plus 0x squared plus 4x. Now remember, you are subtracting this entire expression. When you do long division, you subtract the entire expression, which means, you know, I'm changing all of these signs. So if I'm subtracting x cubed, I'm subtracting 0, so plus a negative 0, and I'm subtracting 4, so plus negative 4. The first one's always going to cancel. The whole point was to eliminate that first term. And you take a look at what you have. You have negative 3x squared minus 0x squared, so that's negative 3x squared. 4x minus 4x is 0x, and we drop down to negative 12. We look at our first terms again. What do you multiply x squared by to get negative 3x squared? And that would be a negative 3. Distribute it to all the terms, and you're going to get negative 3x squared. Now I get minus 0x, and then minus 12. We are subtracting, so we need to change all of our signs. And so the negative becomes a positive, the negative becomes a positive, the negative becomes a positive. Negative 3x squared plus 3x squared cancels out, gives you 0. 0x plus 0x, 0. Negative 12 plus 12, 0. So my remainder is 0, which is good because we're trying to find the rest of the zeros. And so I have the expression x minus 3. That's the factor that remains when I divide the polynomial by x squared plus 4. So x minus 3 equals 0. X is 3. We're asked to find all the zeros. Now we were given 1. We used the conjugate as well, so we have 2. And now we have 3. And so our final answer for all zeros is x equals, I have a positive and a negative 2i, and 3. So those are all of my zeros. So this one's a little more complicated because it involves long division, but the process is very similar. So let's try another one. I have x cubed minus 7x squared plus 16x minus 10, and I'm given here the 3 minus I. So that means my conjugate of 3 plus I is going to be the other 0. So here I had, again, a difficult one. I have to set up my factors. I have x minus 3 minus I and x minus 3 plus I. Simplify, distribute the minus sign, minus 3 plus I. Distribute the minus sign, minus 3 minus I. And here we're going to have to distribute it out. So to distribute out, x is going to be distributed to x, negative 3, and negative I. So that gives me x squared minus 3x minus ix. Negative 3 to x, negative 3 to negative 3, and negative 3 to negative I is minus 3x plus 9 plus 3i. I to x is plus ix. I to negative 3 is minus 3i. I to negative I is minus I squared. And we look at what can cancel. We know all the i's should disappear in some way. Negative ix and positive ix disappear. They cancel. You have 3i and negative 3i. And remember, I squared is negative 1. And so really we have here negative 1, which is a positive 1. So I have x squared minus 6x, and 9 plus 1 is plus 10. And so I'm going to do long division with that trinomial. So let's set up our long division. We have x cubed plus 7x squared plus 16x minus 10. No exponents are missing, so I'm just going to copy it down as is. X cubed minus 7x squared plus 16x minus 10. And we're dividing by x squared minus 6x plus 10. 3 terms, so go over to the third term. This is where we're going to mark our first value. Look at x squared and x cubed. What do you multiply x squared by to get x cubed? And that's x. Distribute it down to all of the terms, and you're going to get x cubed minus 6x squared plus 10x. We are subtracting, so we need to change all of our signs. This positive becomes a negative. The negative becomes positive. The positive becomes a negative. And we cancel out vertically. The x cubed and the x squared are going to disappear. You have negative 7x squared plus 6x squared, and so that gives me negative x squared. 16x minus 10x is positive 6x, and we drop down to negative 10. So again, we look at the first terms. What do you multiply x squared by to get negative x squared? And that's negative 1. Distribute it to all 3 terms, and you get negative x squared plus 6x plus 10. We are subtracting, so we need to change all of our signs. Positive to a negative and a negative. Negative x squared plus x squared cancels. 6x minus 6x cancels. And we have negative 10 plus 10, which is 0. Negative 10 to 10 is a negative 10, and we change it to a plus sign to get 0. And so our expression is x minus 1 that remains. Set it equal to 0, x equals 1. If we want to state all of our zeros, we need to include the originals, which we were given 3 minus I. The conjugate tells us 3 plus I. So one of our zeros is 3 minus I, the other is 3 plus I, and we found the third one to be x equals 1. And so those are all of our zeros. We have one last example, very similar to this one. 2 plus 3i is our imaginary zero, our complex zero given to us. So we're going to use the conjugate as well as 2 minus 3i. And we notice we're going to set up our parentheses. X minus the 2 plus 3i and x minus the 2 minus 3i. That gives you x minus 2 minus 3i, x minus 2 plus 3i. And we distribute it out. We're going to get x squared minus 2x plus 3ix. Distribute the negative 2, you're going to get negative 2x plus 4 minus 6i. Distribute the negative 3i, you're going to get negative 3ix plus 6i minus 9i squared. The 3ix, negative 3ix cancel, negative 6i and 6i cancel. And I'm going to combine like terms. I get x squared minus 4x, 4 minus 9i squared, negative 9 times negative 1 is a positive 9, so that's plus 13. And so I'm going to do long division with x squared minus 4x plus 13. So let's set it up. I'm not missing any exponents, so I can leave it as is. I'm going to do long division with x squared minus 4x plus 13. And I'm dividing into my polynomial, which is x cubed minus 3x squared plus 9x plus 13. You multiply x squared by x to get rid of x cubed, and that gives you x cubed minus 4x squared plus 13x. We are subtracting, so we need to do the opposite. So positive becomes negative, negative becomes positive, positive becomes negative. And we go vertically, the x cubed and negative x cubed cancel. Negative 3x squared plus 4x squared is x squared. 9x minus 13x is negative 4x. Drop down to 13. What do you multiply x squared by to get x squared? And that's a positive 1. So if I distribute a positive 1, that's just going to keep them all the same. And so I get x squared minus 4x plus 13. Since we're subtracting, change all the signs. The positive becomes negative, the negative becomes positive, the positive becomes negative. X squared minus x squared is 0. Negative 4x plus 4x is 0. 13 minus 13 is 0. So our remainder is 0, which is good. So x plus 1 is the factor that remains. Set it equal to 0. X is negative 1. We're asked to find all the zeros. And so we have the real one of negative 1. And we were given in the beginning the 2 plus 3i. And we used the conjugate 2 minus 3i. So our zeros are x equals negative 1 and 2 plus 3i and 2 minus 3i. So when you're given a complex zero, what you have to do is find the conjugate, distribute it out, get the polynomial created, and then you have to do long division. So when you're given a complex zero, you have to do long division. When we were given real zeros before, we could do synthetic division. And so that is how you find the zeros of a polynomial when given complex zeros.